Hello, I'm Barry Daniel, and this is the podcast of the Middle Way Society. Our aim is to encourage a universal approach to living a more integrated, ethical life, avoiding dogma or any appeal to authority. Our guest today is Chris Rose. Chris is the Director of Amos Trust, a small creative human rights organisation which has three main areas of work: promoting Palestinian rights, creating opportunities for girls and young women on the streets, and calling for climate justice. Chris has travelled extensively to Amos partnered projects and led many trips and activities with them, such as home rebuilding, cycling and marathon trips in Palestine. He co-founded the Street Child World Cup in South Africa in 2010 and led Amos's Just Walk from London to Jerusalem in 2017. Prior to this, he was CEO of Romsey Mill, a highly innovative youth project in Cambridge. He's an ordained Anglican Minister, and he's here to talk to us today about the Amos project. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the Middle Way Society podcast.
Hi, lovely to join you.
Okay, well, could you perhaps begin, Chris, by telling us a bit about your background and how you've got to this juncture in your life?
Oh man, how long have you got? I think that's the podcast done, really, isn't it? No, my background's basically I was a youth worker for a number of years. One of those people who I sort of stumbled into youth work through an invitation from someone else when I was about 18. Ended up kind of finding I really enjoyed working with young people, and that'd be young people who would kind of be getting into difficulties of one sort or another. And it was at a stage where career-wise it wasn't kind of much of a career, and if you were doing it as a career, you kind of had to be a bit older than I was at that stage. And so we're kind of looking for things to do. And then I came from Cambridge. My parents are from Cambridge. And I hated Cambridge with a passion and vowed I'd never go back to live there. And I certainly wouldn't at the time take any job which was unpaid. I wasn't. And I ended up back in Cambridge, earning some money to go to Zimbabwe, and was asked to look at a project called Romsey Mill by someone I kind of respected a lot. And I refused to look at it for a while, and then went along and kind of fell in love with it and realised that I'd learn a huge amount from it. And that what they were doing in terms of youth work was really innovative and pushing the window far beyond what some other places were. And very quickly realised actually this was where I kind of felt I should be. I thought it'd be for a couple of years, ended up being there for about, I guess it was 12, 14 years, something like that. And took over and was in charge of the organisation and went through a time of kind of growth in that Labour period where there was the opportunity and there was investment in social projects, and we were developing work with teenage parents, with socially excluded young people, and a whole load of interesting stuff, which at the time I thought was about a kind of longing for these people who I saw as being excluded from a Christian faith and the church and things like that, but more generally from society as well. About acceptance. But then I went to Palestine with Amos in 2004, right at the end of the Second Intifada, or Second Uprising, when it was still very tense there. The conflict hadn't fully ended, or that part of the conflict, I should say. While I was there, there's a bit of the Bible called the Beatitudes, which is when Jesus lays out his kind of vision for how things are. And people know it has a blessed are those who do this, blessed are those. And I kind of got the sense that actually what he may have been saying was that each of us is kind of called to pursue something. And that may be justice, that may be being a peacemaker, that may be being someone who's looking for what is pure, it may be being with those who grieve, it could be all those things. And for me, I became really aware that what had driven me so far in my life had actually been this blessed are the peacemakers and blessed are those who seek for justice. And that actually it was justice which had got me involved in youth work. And that justice had kind of led to me, by that stage I was ordained, to being ordained. I wasn't working full time in the church. I was ordained to do stuff with communities and to develop new ways of carrying out church. But actually, it was fundamentally about that call to justice. And so about a year later on, when a friend of mine, a friend of Amos, said they were looking for someone and to help them grow and develop and go in a slightly new direction, I was really interested. It was a very big change for me. It was kind of moving from being a very big fish in a little pond to being kind of a minnow in a very, very large pond. And a very different way of working, but it was something which I found immensely appealing. And I've been with Amos now since 2006.
Brilliant. And would you say that justice is the main principle of the Amos Trust?
Justice and hope. I think
right.
The two things I say very strongly. I think that it's been our strapline for years, and at times we kind of moved away. Our strapline more now as we do hope. But justice and hope are the two absolute hallmarks of what we're about. And I'll say more about hope as we go along. I won't now. But yeah, those two things are really what it's about. Yeah.
And how? So you joined in 2006. How was it originally set up? And
well, yeah, I'll give you the kind of a couple of variations on the background as well. So basically, it was set up in 1985 by a singer-songwriter called Garth Hewitt. Garth was touring with a number of different organizations, and he was pursuing his own music career. And he was becoming increasingly dissatisfied that he was kind of working for people like Christian Aid, Tear Fund, people like that, some of the bigger faith-based NGOs. And he was finding that often he would go to a community and the message calendar, by the time he'd come back, had kind of moved on for those organizations. And he really wanted to tell the stories of the communities he met and to share about those. And some people supported him to do that. And so it was kind of built around Garth, to be honest,
right,
about his music, about him telling these stories. And Garth is the most phenomenal storyteller and musician, and has a way of capturing the dignity of people and talking about situations and singing songs about situations and bringing people's stories to life.
Yeah.
And so it was formed about that in 1985. The name Amos comes from the Old Testament prophet Amos, and the bit which is "Let justice flow like river and righteousness like a never-ending stream." Now, I think it actually means "Let justice flow like a river, like a mighty flood." I think it's a far better translation of it. Of what it means. And Garth had particularly been inspired by that, partially because the next verse is all about slagging off musicians who don't speak about justice. But the other major source of being because for Martin Luther King, it was one of his most favorite verses. And this is very much how we attribute it. And Martin Luther King, I think he did it I think he quoted it on when he spoke at the Washington Monument.
Yeah.
As the verse then. And Garth had been to hear Martin Luther King speak in St. Paul's Cathedral.
Wow.
In 1966, 67 or 68. He died in 68, didn't he? So it was definitely before then.
Yeah.
So I can't remember the exact year. You'll have to look it up. And at the time, none of his friends wanted to go with him. And they all said no, because they just assumed he was going to be around forever. And so he went up, and he was remarkably struck by that. And the values which kind of underpinned Martin Luther King, underpinned Garth and Amos, and is that kind of breed of liberation theology which we see in South Africa with Desmond Tutu, with other people. We see with Biko and some other people in South Africa as well. And this kind of combination of politics, music, art, justice, real engagement with communities, all the things which was a hallmark of lots of liberation theology, and particularly say in Latin America with Nicaragua and places like that, which we work in. And those things which were very much at the core of Amos, and the creativity was really kind of at the core of my own theology as well, and what I believed in. And so there was this kind of synergy there, really. Yeah. Okay.
And then the trust is rooted in the inclusive stream of Christianity. Yeah. So for anyone not familiar with that term, we spoke about this already.
Okay. Our reason for saying that is, and this is going to sound, people may object to this, so it's fine. I like to think I'm not a member of many things which can be homophobic, colonial, and largely sexist. But the church, I think it's reasonable to say, can be all three of those. And there's aspects of the church particularly which are very much that. There's aspects of Christianity which I really dislike. I mean, a lot of the North American Christianity and their views, I find I have nothing in common with a lot of what their views are. And not only about Zionism, about weapons, about Donald Trump, about lots and lots of issues. I find it almost incomprehensible that we follow the same faith. So for us, we have a real problem with the word Christian. We kind of use it very, very, very occasionally, really, because of that whole stream there, which is so powerful. And when I travel in South America, there, everywhere I go, I mean, I bought some coffee and it's got a Star of David. You go to a hotel, it's got a Star of David and the thing, because it's all from this thing about if you bless Israel, God will bless you, which is kind of this corruption, I think, of what the Bible's trying to say in that. And so for us, when we talk about an inclusive stream, it's kind of language. I'm not sure anybody would know it. It was a way of us saying we're committed to this really kind of, at times, really rare part of Christianity, which is about gay rights, which is about rights for the oppressed, which is anti-colonial, which is anti-sexism, which is pro-people and pro-people's rights. And we believe that's a vibrant part of Christianity, but we believe it's a very, very small stream or puddle of Christian thought very often.
Well, it's...
and that's what we're committed to. But that's also massively inclusive, because so we would have Muslim and Jewish board members and staff at various points from both those backgrounds. We'd have people who wouldn't profess the faith, would have Buddhists, would have, you name it, involved. We wouldn't dream, and frankly, I couldn't care less what someone believes in that sort of way. I care about what they do about it and their values and how they see that being worked out. So that's where we are with that. And so we kind of find it really difficult to find the right language for it. And normally we don't talk about it. We talk about hope, but we don't talk about some of those bigger labels because it's just really, really difficult.
So what are the core values of the trust, and Chris?
Yeah, well, hope is a value for us. I would say hope, justice, and rights really are the absolute core values. And and with that, creativity, which I don't think creativity is a value. It may be a value, I don't know, but the creativity tied into that. So for us, hope is not this pie in the sky type thing. Hope is really real. Václav Havel said that hope has its most meaning when the chances of success are minimal, but we do it because we do the right thing. And even more so, he carries on to say that, and when the chances of success are so minimal, like they were when they were in prison, then hope is even more tangible to it. So hope is a real value. Justice is a real value for us. Justice, we get sometimes people get very confused about justice in a very odd way, and they want to separate out justice in courts from social justice very often. I kind of find that to be a slightly dangerous process, because there is, or people talk about natural justice, and I talk about those. There is a fairly innate sense of justice. It's not right that children in our world have so few opportunities. It's not right that girls are not allowed to be in school. It's not right that people take someone else's land. Those are innate forms of justice. So there's those aspects of justice which are very much there. And those are the things with justice which we would talk about. Now, they may have legal representation, they may have lots of different things, but it's those kind of fundamentals of what we would say is just and unjust. And then rights, because we really do believe in rights. And we see rights coming under so much attack at this time, and they're real importance. But they're not rights which, it's like they're that inalienable rights type issue. We're not, the danger with that is it kind of implies that, well, we've all got these things and that's the end of it. We may have these things, but we have to fight for these things. And these things are only real when they're fleshed out on the ground, and when we hold to them, and when we demand them. And so for us, our breast cancer screening work, which we support in Gaza, is about women's rights. And it's about women's rights in the face of an occupation and in the face of them being refused treatment. It's also their rights in a society which denies their right for medical care very often for it, or denies their, not denies their right for medical care, but within the tradition which says actually, if you have breast cancer, you may well be divorced, all those things. And so it's about women's rights in that respect, in a very pragmatic way of realizing those on the ground.
Okay, well, can we just go into the three main areas of work? You've touched on them, but if you could just flesh them out a bit more.
Yeah. So I'll come to Palestine last because it's a pretty biggest one, and at this moment in time, since October the 7th, as you can imagine, it's dominating all our work. Yeah. So our three areas of work have a long-standing background. We've been working with children on the streets for about 30 years, something like that. And it started in South Africa with actually Garth's son, Tom Hewitt. Just after the end of apartheid, he was over there and started to see that children on the streets were having so little opportunity and we're going to be one of the last groups who was going to hopefully benefit from the new South Africa. And the Trust decided to continue working. They've been working on the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa for many years before then. And they decided to carry on working in South Africa. So the work grew, and it was kind of based in Durban. And then in 2010, in response to their advocacy work about children on the streets being rounded up by police and being beaten up and held by police, and shipped into the bush and left. And at every big sporting event, you'd have people sleeping on the streets, or those communities are normally swept away, and cities try to get rid of their population. In 2010, the run up to the tournament, we thought we had this opportunity to try to really shine a light on this story. And we set up a thing called the Street Child World Cup with John Rowe, the founder, and myself particularly. And we had 8 teams from different places to shine this light on this. And that was a real seismic moment for children on the streets, but also it created an event which has now grown and is quite successful. And Fantastic. It was a complete impossibility to do it. The municipal authority in Durban hated it, didn't want us doing it. These children had no passports, no identity, they had nothing at all. So to try to get them there, they relied on incredible teams. And yet our belief was that actually if we did it, that it would have a massive impact and we could trust in the children. Actually, if they're given a chance, that's all they needed. And so from that led to us developing work and expanding the work which we did with children on the streets. It led to us being involved in Rio 2014 Street Child World Cup, but also to us doing more work about children's voices. And then in about 2016, 2017, we've done a lot of work, and we had 4 partners by that stage in different places. And we've been involved in numerous different things. I was visiting South Africa again, and we were running a Commonwealth Relief grant. And there'd been a transformative impact on Durban and on children's experiences. And Tombo had done an incredible job, and all these different things. And Tom Hewitt had left by that stage, had done an incredible job. But I came around the corner, and there was 3 girls who were pretty about 13, 14, who selling their bodies for money. And I spoke to the staff and just said, tell us a bit about them. And they said, we've tried all this stuff, but we cannot get any programs which work. And so we went away from that, and we decided that actually, and we spoke to lots of people, and so many places just said, we cannot develop work with girls on the streets. We keep on trying things, and it's not working. So we decided that actually we'd downsize what we're doing, and we'd just focus on girls on the streets. And we'll try to address this issue. And that was the whole point. We're a small organisation. We can do that. We don't want to be big. We want to be small, so we can do that sort of stuff. Yeah. So we then spent about 5 years, a bit more than that, spent about 6 years. We focused just on girls in a project called On Her Terms, and worked with a selection of fantastic partners to develop new ways of working with girls on the streets, which has been really successful. And that's been our focus for our girls' work, for our work there for the last 5 years. And just been reading, just as we were coming on air, a write-up about our work in Tanzania, which is with teenage girls who've been involved in prostitution. They kind of met through that. They're all HIV positive. And most of them kind of pick up people around the football stadium late at night. If you walk around the football stadium and Mwanza, where it's based, you'll see hundreds of girls just waiting there, hundreds, trying to get sex, trying to sell themselves. And it'd be kind of about £1 a time very often for sex. And this project has been absolutely remarkable, working with girls like this, and teaching them through group work, employment skills, enabling them to find employment for themselves, to gradually move away from sex work, to have a whole view of themselves about who they can achieve, what they can achieve, their value, their worth. Just remarkable work, absolutely inspiring work, and incredible girls and incredible people involved.
Fantastic. You're saying that when you first encountered those 13, 14-year-old girls, the people you spoke to said, it's an impossible task. So what was it they were not doing that you're doing? How did you?
We'd worked with girls and we knew the difficulties of it, and there'd been so much progress made in Durban with people, and yet there were still these people who just really difficult. So what we did is we spent the first 2 years of that. In fact, it's been about 7 years. First couple of years were really about listening and just trying to work it out and seeing what did work and what didn't work. And the fundamental things were girls on the streets. We kind of estimated it was about 6 to 8 times harder to work with a girl on the street than with a boy. Now, if you looked at youth work traditionally, youth work everywhere was set up about boys originally. And so if you look to work on the streets, because boys are far more visible, girls get trapped in the sex industry or they'll be moved into flats, all these things, they can be quite invisible. Work with boys was the easy thing. You can also argue, and a lot of people say, if you have sons, you may know that you may agree this or not. Often they're a bit like Labrador puppies. If you feed them and if you throw the ball for them, they'll run around and enjoy themselves for hours on end. And it's far, far harder with girls to really engage them. So there's those things about social emotional intelligence, really. But there's the other part, which is that girls are judged to being on the streets, boys aren't. So if you're a girl on the street, it's your fault you're there, even though you've been abused and you've fled abuse. If you're involved in prostitution, it's not the man's fault who's paying for it, it's your fault for being a prostitute. All those things. Yeah. So they're judged massively, and there's a stigma which comes with that as well. What the girls learn is not to trust anybody at all. So there's a whole load of things about trust, about ways of working within that, about expectations, about a load of ways in which workers themselves see the girls, a whole load of stuff which had to be relearnt and relearnt. And in that process for a couple of years and then implemented in different ways in different countries. And it's been that implementation which has been great to see.
Brilliant.
So that's the work with girls on the streets. And that project, we're kind of we're kind of not doing as much profile as we have for the last period because we're not really big enough to have 3 campaigns at once. We can only really do 2. So for the next couple of years, we'll be supporting it, but we'll really be focused on our climate justice work and our work in Palestine. The climate justice work, we worked in Nicaragua for years and years and years. And it goes back to the Sandinista Contra period. We met people there, I've been really inspired by what they were doing. And then we'd worked through the issues about fair trade with them. We'd worked through issues about the North American domination of the economy there. And increasingly what we were seeing with climate change becoming more and more evident was the place that was most evident, first of all, were places like Nicaragua, which is one of the countries most affected by climate change in that Central American belt. But climate change adds to all the other issues which were prevalent there, which was deforestation during the Sandinista period because they couldn't sell anything apart from wood to Cuba. America embargo on and meant they couldn't trade anything else. So there's massive deforestation, and they used it for fuel as well. Yeah. So you have a legacy of that. You have this massively changing climate, and you have a legacy of urban poverty and people in rural poverty, rural isolation, and all these issues. So they started developing work there, working in local communities. They've worked in communities always our partners have had for many years, and really targeting a piece of work which they choose 7 communities for a 5-year period, and everything has to be sustainable. So at the end of the 5-year period, they step out, and there can be nothing there which is not sustainable. The impact of that has been incredible. They'll train people, they'll do seeds, they'll do a whole load of stuff. They may help with drip irrigation systems, all that stuff. Natural fertilizers, natural forestation, water management, a whole load of stuff. Lots about women's empowerment, micro industries, but the major thing they do is they empower community leadership with that, so that people know how to talk to governments about their rights, how to talk to local different groups, how to lobby for change. And so in the community we're working at the moment, we've seen them all now connected to electricity, which means they can pump water, and none of them were before. We've seen road access, which without road access, you can't get electricity. So road access was the first thing for all of them, but them campaigning for it. And not funded by us, bits of it have been, but very small bits. It's been partnerships. I guess it's private-public partnership, as it should be. One way of saying that. So incredible work. They're all doing well local things, and real practical ways of responding to climate change on the ground, and the voices from them saying, this is what our experience of climate change is, and the call for climate justice from the Global South. Alongside that, we've recently set up a climate fellowship. We did a pilot project last year, and what we've done now is with 12 female climate activists from Central America, mainly Mexico, but not exclusively. And the aim is to develop a network of young female climate activists who can support one another and can further that, because we believe that the feminist models of leadership are the most effective ones in addressing climate action.
I think the evidence backs that up as well, isn't it?
We're not alone in thinking that. I think that's the movement thinks that. Yeah. And so that's really where we're rooted very much. We're looking at Central America for that, which has surprised us, I think. And it's particularly daft to think if you're in the UK, because there's very little funding for Central America compared to other places.
Yeah.
But it feels to us exactly the right thing to be doing. And partially because in all of our work, we try to have a threefold approach, which is about culture, facts on the ground, and rights. And I'll talk about that in Palestine, where it's most developed.
Yeah.
But you have that so strongly in Central America about culture. You have that about the facts on the ground about deforestation, about climate change, about water management, about soil erosion, about all those issues.
Yeah.
And you also have rights being a society which has a high level of machismo, has women's rights are absolutely central within that, and achieving those is central. So all those things come together very much for us there. So it kind of all makes sense. And we're just also trying to work out quite what our wider call to UK will be. What I mean by that is that obviously it's climate justice, but what is specific calls which we're making about girls and young women and climate justice and the environmental movement. So which is where we are at the moment. So we're kind of interested in finding what it's going to be. So that's the climate stuff. And then the third area is Palestine, which, it's kind of like take a breath, because this is where it kind of jumps off the deep end, really.
Yeah.
We've been involved in Palestine for many, many years, again, 30, 40 years. We have a threefold approach to Palestine. We have partners. So we have partners on the ground, different countries working on different issues. We've got, I think it's 8 partners in Palestine and many, many other organizations we work with. Our basic thing is about Palestinian rights, and it's about a real belief that if there's equal rights, people will be able to work out their own future. It doesn't need power like ourselves, with all our track record in there, to be trying to define what the future should be. It's about enabling people to actually get there themselves.
Yeah.
And so our work there is about culture, facts on the ground, and about promoting rights. And what that means is, so for the culture aspects, we work with a large number of musicians, artists, chefs, and a whole variety of other things celebrating Palestinian culture. it came from a load of work we did a couple of years ago, listening to what Palestinians said was most important. They said, celebrate our culture. It's what draws us together. Promote our culture. It's what defines us as Palestinians very often. And it needs to be celebrated then because it's being taken very often. And unless we have our culture, then actually identity is lost. Mm. So we work with a whole variety of different Palestinians, the same musicians, chefs, artists. We've got a wonderful collection of art from Gaza on our website called On Location, and we're working. It features 16 major artists, but about another 30 or 40 in the next exhibition we did with a place called the Waldorf Hotel in Bethlehem, which is Banksy's hotel.
See now where this value of creativity comes in now.
Yeah, very much indeed. Yeah, that's part of how it comes in. So it comes in very strongly in the cultural aspects. Food is a major thing for us. We do food tours. We work with chefs, Palestinian chefs in the UK. We see it as such an important way of challenging myths, but also celebrating identity and celebrating culture.
Yeah, yeah.
And also we kind of like it as well. So
yeah,
that's the other nice thing about it. We work with musicians that work a lot with Palestinian poets, and have a long history of that, and also, say, Palestinian musicians. So we've got a real background there, but we also believe the culture is about hospitality. It's about the values. It's about a whole load of stuff, which we want to celebrate within that. One of our partners is in the west in Bethlehem is called Arawab, which is it's a project in Ida refugee camp, and they do a thing called Beautiful Resistance, which is teaching children in the camp. The camps are the most difficult places for children, and the places where if you like, resistance is most felt. And Ida camp has a separation wall on two sides of it, very hemmed in, densely populated. And the soldiers from the camp regularly raid, from their neighbouring military camp, regularly raid the camp on most days, to be honest. A few years ago, it was recorded as being the most tear gas place in the world. And they work on a thing called Beautiful Resistance, which is about teaching young people music, dance, art, photography, filmmaking, in order that they can have a voice, but they won't be involved in futile acts of resistance. And so we work with them, which is a beautiful project, but so we work with artists, different people in different ways. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is facts on the ground. It takes a statement which I think it was Ariel Sharon said, grab all the hilltops and build facts on the ground.
Say that again, grab all the hilltops.
And build facts on the ground. Build facts on the ground. It was a big design. It was part of the call to West Bank settlers to kind of build facts on the ground so that we get the land, so you can't take it back. So we kind of repurposed that and said what we're about is facts on the ground. So that means a load of building works in communities in the South Hebron Hills and Hebron. It means home rebuilds for houses which have been destroyed by the Israeli Defense Force, which are in Palestinian land, which are owned by Palestinians, but they have no right to build, because if you're in what's called Area C, which is under Israeli control, which is 67% of the West Bank, you will never get planning permission, or less than 1% of people get planning permission. So you have to build illegally, and then the risk is it can be destroyed.
Yeah.
So we've rebuilt kind of 10 or 12 houses, which are very much a community project and working with the community there. And none of those are safeguarded. One of them got destroyed recently, and then we've been involved in rebuilding that one. Then a whole variety of smaller community projects as well, which are all about facts on the ground. In Gaza, for us, the facts on the ground meant before the conflict that we did a load of youth training, enabling young people to have employment skills. Gaza had massive youth unemployment. There was sort of 70% of graduates were unemployed. And so graduates had to be retrained in basic skills. So it was retraining people. So it was about training and equipping people, but really a facts on the ground program. And that's different partners of ours who are involved in that in different ways. And then the third area is about rights, and that's the advocacy and campaign work we do in the UK, which obviously ties into the creative stuff. But it's also about, as I said, the breast cancer screening work, which we supported in Gaza, which was saying that the fact that women are 3 times more likely to die from breast cancer in Gaza than they were in Israel or they were in the UK that's a rights issue, and that's a fundamental on-the-ground rights issue, which we can address, as well as being a wider issue about what's happening there. So it's those rights which are kind of really tangible and kind of fleshed out on the ground. Another one of those is a project we work with called We're Not Numbers from Gaza, which is about a youth journalism program. It was set up by Ahmed al-Nawak when his brother was killed and his friends were killed as a teenager, and some journalists were there, worked with him to tell his story. And it's a storytelling vehicle for young people from Gaza. It trains them in journalism, enables them to realize they have a voice and that people want to hear it, and to do that in English medium. And again, it's about that right for young people's voices to be heard and for them to be heard and to know that.
Just a thought comes to mind, like when your core values is hope, and imagine in the current situation, you're coming across a lot of despair there. How are you sort of approaching that?
Yeah, so much despair. Ahmed himself had, I think it was 23 members of his family were killed. One missile strike just after the start of this conflict. There's so much despair. The situation is truly, truly, unbelievably awful. On the West Bank, it's awful. In Gaza, it's just absolutely beyond words. We would say it's a genocide, and we would use that word very deliberately in its right legal meaning. It's a deliberate act of starvation. It's a deliberate act of refusing a community food, fuel, water. And it's also bombing a civilian community. When you look at the proportion of children and women killed there compared to any other conflict, it's astronomical difference. I think it's about 79% is a normal percentage of women and children killed. In this conflict, it's way over 50%. It's just massively different.
Yeah.
I think 70% here. So it's an attack on the civilian population, just massive destruction, awful, awful scenes. So many atrocities you couldn't even mention. The hospital which we work in, there was times it looked like 19th century. It looked like, literally like 19th century care, because they were carrying out operations without anaesthetics, because there was no anaesthetics, amputations without anaesthetics, cesareans on the floor, and no anaesthetics, no way of sterilizing equipment effectively, all this stuff, just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So the situation is absolutely horrific. We have no real hope in the kind of global political things. It just doesn't make sense. There is no, and the world leaders have become more and more clear. The protests, all the things people are doing around the world, the countless protests, the countless people who are giving to campaigns, who are standing up for Gaza, who are saying this is wrong. The creative responses we've worked on, we've done a whole load of stuff with dinners, with concerts, with all this stuff. The poets speaking out, the different voices, just the numbers finding creative ways of campaigning. All those things are so hopeful, because that's what changes. And you look at the student protests. What a remarkable thing that is. What a brave thing for students at this time when they're so crippled by debt to say, I'm going to actually put my very future on the line for these people who I've never met, but I actually believe this is right. All those things are so full of hope. The voices of people from Gaza themselves have been remarkable, and so often in the midst of this. Sunbird is one of our team, which is a paracycling team from Gaza. They'd all lost their leg because of the Great March of Return, other Israeli aggression. In the Great March of Return, which was a peaceful protest against the war, Israeli snipers, which they have done in the West Bank and elsewhere, deliberately targeted lower limbs, and limbs generally, particularly lower limbs, and shot them with high-velocity bullets, which causes multiple fractures and leads to amputations. You can save a leg if you're allowed out to go to specialist surgery outside of the Gaza, but obviously no one was being allowed out.
No.
So Allah, he was the leading Palestinian cyclist, had just finally got permission to go to an international tournament. He was at the back of the protest, just watching, had his bike with him, he was in full cycling gear. And he was targeted by an Israeli sniper who shot him in his leg, and it led to his leg being amputated. he hit a moment of despair. Then he said, no, I'm going to carry on cycling with one leg, and I will set up a power cycling team. That's what I want to do. So ourselves, with a group of inspirational people called the Son of the Gaza Sunbirds, and we've been in the background supporting this. So we kind of want them to have, they're in the front, we're in the background doing the kind of financial stuff and all that stuff for them to be able to pursue it. They've been pursuing this dream for them representing themselves at the Paralympics in Paris this year. And that team, at the start of the conflict, we'd spent the year growing and working with them, and Karim, who heads it up, the other person with Allah who heads it up, had done an incredible job supporting, pushing them to train regularly, despite all the stuff which prevented training. And Gaza's minute, so you can imagine cycle training is not easy there, and the roads are awful before the conflict. And you couldn't get equipment, you couldn't get any of that stuff easily. So it'd been a real uphill struggle. And then when the conflict started, this part of the conflict started after October 7th, we sent through some money because we give stipends to these athletes because they can't afford food otherwise because there's such massive shortages. So without that, they can't train.
Yeah.
And they came back the next day saying we spent the stipends. We decided to buy food for our communities and feed them with them. If you can send some more money, we can do more aid deliveries. So they started taking aid to their communities, all of them with only one leg each, on bikes, borrowing cars or with donkey carts or just carrying it. So they did this incredible work there, and it's just an unbelievable story of hope. And their Instagram channel is remarkable. And it's been really hard to get resources to them to do it. It was just really an uphill struggle, and it's continues to be really hard to get resources to them to carry on doing that. So that's been remarkable. And then Allah from the team took part in, to qualify for the Olympics, you have to take part, Paralympics, you have to take part in the Paracycling World Championships, and there's 4 events for it. They missed the first one because they couldn't get out of Gaza and they couldn't get any permission to travel. And we tried to get them out a number of times before before October 7th, and they couldn't get out. Eventually, we managed to get them out into Egypt, and had an agreement with the Olympic Union from Palestine which had to give them permission to go and train to take part in Belgium. So they got to Belgium the day before the second round of this Paracycling World Championships, which happened there. Took part in that on equipment which we kind of bought from different cycling shops the day before because we only found permission about a day before we got there. So all this stuff, just a real uphill struggle. And then the next race was in Italy. Permission didn't get through until after the first race had happened, so they missed that, but they got there for the second race. The third event is in Kazakhstan, so we're now trying to get them to Kazakhstan. And I've got no idea how you get visas for Kazakhstan, but they're working around that. And then hopefully, if they go to all those 3, they may get a wild card place to take part in the Paralympics, which would just be unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah.
And so things like that are where we see hope.
Yeah, it sounds like you see hope very much as a verb as well in many ways.
Hope is definitely a verb. That's one of our staff. Meg, she always just says hope's a verb. Hope is a verb. Another example of hope, which is kind of, and this is really about values more than anything else. So we're involved in a thing called the Big Ride for Palestine. And the Big Ride for Palestine has about 250 people every year and going around different parts of the country for 3 days cycling. And we've been involved in that and loved it for years. And I couldn't go to it most years because it was school holidays, kids were young or younger. But for the last few years, I've been able to go. And I would cycle at the back, so I do a load of cycling, and I kind of love cycling. So I'll be at the back, I'll do punctures for people and stuff like that, help with those. And I did a bit of this last year, I was doing first aid because I was first aid trained, obviously. And there's a remarkable lady called Anne who I'd be chatting to at the back. And I'm the sort of person who chat to anybody. And at the back, you have all the best conversations. At the front, they're all kind of bothered about where they're going. At the back, we couldn't care less where we're going. We're just talking to each other and enjoying the ride. And so we're chatting away. And she asked me about some of the cycling I've done. I'd just been in the Alps and come back, having had a remarkable time cycling there. And she said, before I die, I really want to cycle up Mont Ventoux. Now, Mont Ventoux is kind of on every cyclist's bucket list. It's in the Provence. It's one of the most famous cycle climbs in the world. It's 1,700 meters of climbing to a peak which is just under 2,000 meters, I think it's 1994 or something at the top. said, I really want to cycle up that. That's my bucket list. So I went off and I kind of was chatting to people, came back to a bit later on and said, and I'll do that with you next year. And I was thinking, my mum's currently waiting for hip replacements, which have been deferred and deferred. And it was partially about kind of honouring my mum, who was so active before she couldn't be active because of this, because she's become infirm because of waiting for these operations. And partially that, and partly because I just thought, I just wish that if my mum says something, that someone would say, yeah, I'll do it with you. But also it just seemed like a wonderful thing I want to move on to. And I thought, it'd be lovely. So then in about February, March, Anne got in touch and said, are you still up for doing Bond 2? And at that stage, everything had kicked off with Gaza. And I was thinking, oh man, life, how am I going to find 3 or 4 days to do this? And then she said, I'd really like to do this for your work in Gaza and for the children in Gaza. So last week, Anne plus 4 of us went to Bond 2 and she cycled up Bond 2. She was 82-year-olds. Most 20-year-olds couldn't do it.
Wow.
I mean, it's one of the serious, it's called the Beast for Romsey. It's just serious cycling. And the weather was awful. It was 1 degree at the top, thick cloud cover, thunderstorms, hail, pissing down with rain. We got to Tom Simpson Memorial. Tom Simpson was a famous athlete who died from speed on there. And you're thinking, no wonder you died on this mountain. It's just absolutely brutal. Couldn't see anything. And she just kept going. She was saying, this is just like childbirth. It just, and I was thinking, I don't know, I've never given birth. She said, this is just awful. It just keeps on going and the pain keeps on going. And she got to the top. And so far, she's raised £20,000 for Gaza. Anybody listening to this, please give Just Giving pages. It's been the BBC talking about Gaza, talking about these things. It's been different press, all of them talking about the situation in Gaza and what's happened there through her. And so something like that is a wonderful story of hope. And we share that and we share all the protests with our partners in Palestine so they can see what's happening and they can see the global solidarity and that people really do care.
Fantastic. When I first approached you, you wanted a chat beforehand because you had a little bit of concern about balance, and that's probably also due to maybe a misconception of balance in the wider discourse at the moment about Palestine. Would you like to expand on that a bit, and we could perhaps chat about that?
Yeah, sure. For me, when I heard the term middle way, it felt like it was an invitation to something which was about something which was associated with balance, where you took 2 sides and you tried to find this balanced way forward. And we see that with the BBC's been in that place where it's had to do that.
Climate change, for example.
Climate change, you see it on Palestine all the time, where we've got to have a Palestinian voice, got to have a Jewish voice to give balance to this.
I think there's a fallacy. It's called the appeal to moderation. It's the assumption that the middle is the moderate view is the right view, and
there's somehow in this, and if we just talk, everything will be okay. Which doesn't happen. So it was that thing about balance, and from a faith base, I don't believe in balance. I just don't think it's I think the Jesus I see in the Bible is completely unreasonable. And he was crucified because he was unreasonable. He wasn't crucified because he gave a nice balanced view on those things. He was someone who upset everything. And therefore he had to die. So when I heard the term middle way, I was somewhat concerned that I was going to be invited to. And when you said you heard Robert Cohen, our chair, speak, and you really wanted to speak about Amos, I was thinking, well, Robert wouldn't have said anything with any balance. He's never going to go launching into that. He'd be very careful in what he says, but very thought through. But yeah, that wouldn't be a description there. So I was really intrigued as to what middle way
is.
Meant.
Yeah, but
and so it's more like the third rail.
Yeah, well, absolutely, yeah.
Well,
for me, I mean, my understanding of the middle way is that it's the avoidance of absolutes, and by absolute is when you think you have the whole picture and there's no recognition of complexity, and so by avoiding those extremes, then that throws you and that maybe, you see, the middle is a bit misleading. It throws you in that messy, uncertain space between those two polarities, where...
And I think that's what appeals to me about it, because say something like, we're acutely aware of the massive pressure on Jewish communities in the UK at this time.
Yeah.
The hatred which has come their way. We're also acutely aware that so many of them have lost people on October the 7th, that there's confliction, that there's a whole load of different things there, and it's not homogenous community by any stretch of the imagination, of course not. And that there is a real complexity there.
Absolutely.
And anything which denies that complexity doesn't really help anybody. Absolutely.
There was a great example today, where a false dichotomy, if you like, when Ireland, Norway, and Spain said they plan to recognise a Palestinian state, and then straight away Israel said withdraw the ambassadors. I mean, normally the classic example was George Bush years ago. He says, "You're either with us or against us." There's no recognition. Ignored all the other possibilities. But this, to me, was a great example today as well.
Oh, I think that we saw it yesterday, the ICJ ruling about Netanyahu, particularly the response from Biden, people like that. And what you see where governments, and particularly traditional Western governments, are, which is about standing by this person, not listening to what the ICJ is saying, but saying that can't possibly be the case. And you see that as the complete opposite of where we would be coming from, and which the ICJ is coming from in this. We see that. I think we see it really clearly in the global stage at this moment, these kind of dichotomies being played out. And I would argue that we see the opposition, therefore, kind of trying to find a middle ground, which feels a very odd middle ground, which all the time. And I think many of us would say, no, stand by your values, stand by what you believe in, not this other thing just to kind of win an election.
Yeah, absolutely.
And anyway, I don't know. I mean, apparently at this moment in time, an election is being called.
That's right. Just before I spoke to you, I think they're going to say July the 4th, I think. Yeah. Oh. Anyway, I'd just like to say, Chris, I'm so full of admiration for the work you are doing in the Amos Trust. And just for people out there who've perhaps been inspired by what you said today, in what way could they either help or potentially get involved? Could you, if you could just say the name of the website as well, that would be helpful.
So our website is www.amostrust.org. Please do visit it. You'll see loads of stories there of hope. Loads of different events we've got on. We've got an event on June the 9th. Then this will go out. Will this go out before June the 9th?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll think ready by then.
On June the 9th, called Souk al Salam, which is a cooking event at St James Piccadilly, which Sami Tamimi and loads of chefs are coming together as a kind of food market, where you can see links through to go that. We've got a big cycling challenge this weekend, where and there's loads of things you can get involved in that. We do webinars, podcasts, we do lots of trips for people. You can obviously give, and our real commitment is to try to get money to communities in Gaza as quickly and as effectively as we can do, and food and support them as quickly as possible at this time, and to the West Bank as well. So you can be involved in those. We do regular newsletters, we do all that stuff. So have a look at it, see if you like it. We sell various bits and pieces there. We just do hopefully some fun, creative stuff, but with a real commitment. And if that's something you like, please do sign up for our newsletters and get involved. We really try to get to know the people involved with Amos. We're about our supporters and about trying to restrict the gap between our supporters and our partners. And we kind of try to get around the country doing that as well. So please do, please do visit our website, www.amostrust.org, or look us up on Instagram as well, because there's loads of great pictures on there.
Smashing. Oh, well, it's been great to talk to you today, Chris. Thank you for all the work you're doing, and thanks for speaking to me today.
Absolute pleasure. And it's lovely to meet you. Take care.
You can find out more about middle way philosophy
at www.middlewaysociety.org.